Happy New Year! Hope you're having a good start of January, because it's definitely still the start of January. Today I am doing my December wrap up. Not late at all. I've had a few different thoughts about how to do this, so let me know in the comments if you think that there is a better way, but I've decided I'm going to rank every book I read in December from the worst book all the way up to the best book. I read 12 books in December, so let's get started. So the worst book I read in December by quite some margin was The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. Now this is the second book in the Poppy Word trilogy, and I like the first book well enough, but I found the main character in this book so freaking irritating. I can't even put it into words. She is faced with quite a lot of decisions throughout this book, as characters tend to be, and she makes the wrong one half the time, and the other half of the time she makes the very obvious decision, but spends about 10 pages vacillating over whether she'll make this decision or a terrible decision, and it just annoyed me. I find stupid characters really tough to read, and I really don't think it was necessary, especially because she's not particularly stupid in the first book, and I know for a fact that R.F. Kuang is really intelligent because I've seen her live talks, I've read her other books. She is smart, so why on earth she made the decision to write one of the stupidest protagonists I've ever read? Okay, so at joint number 10, I'm going to put Academ's Fury and Of Blood and Fire, which we'll speak about separately, but basically had the same problem with them, which is just that they were not very interesting to me. So first, let's talk about Of Blood and Fire by Ryan Cahill. Now, this is self-publishing's darling, and it's not very good. I'm not entirely sure why this book is so beloved within the self-publishing community, because it's exactly what I hope not to see from a self-published book, which is generic and poorly written. I've heard this book compared to a plethora of different books, and I think that really speaks to the problem with this book, which is that it's really generic. It's not doing anything original for the genre at all. It feels like something written by someone who likes fantasy and wants to write their own fantasy, but doesn't really have any idea what they want to write, so they just kind of grab things from all over the place and write a generic fantasy book. Prose was the other real problem with this book. Now, this is something that I hear talked about in self-publishing a lot, is that prose can be weaker, and this is another reason I'm baffled as to why you would hold this up as a great example of self-publishing, because the prose is wordy, there are weak metaphors, and it needed editing. Yeah, this book didn't have a tremendous amount going for it. It wasn't actively bad, it just didn't do anything at all for me. I'm someone who really looks for originality in their books. I've read so many fantasy books, and if you're just going to pump out another run-of-the-mill, I'm not interested. Onwards and sideways to Academs of Future by Jim Butcher. This is the second book in the Codex Alera series, and I think probably where I'm going to stop with this series. It had a really nice elemental magic to it and very little else going for it. Again, world building that wasn't particularly exciting. We have fairly flat characters. I struggle with exactly what to say with this book because it's like reviewing lettuce. Nobody loves lettuce, nobody hates lettuce. You eat it because it's healthy, but it's just lettuce. And I wanted more from an author who I know is super talented and a master of his craft. Certainly this is earlier in his bookography, chronology, discography, but nonetheless, this just didn't do anything for me, and that's why it's where it is in this ranking, because it's a nothing burger of a book, frankly. Now, Perfume is the next book in the list at number 9. Now, this is definitely not a nothing burger of a book. It's about a man who really likes to smell things. In fact, he has, quite frankly, an incredible nose, and he uses it a lot in this book. I had quite a few problems with this book as well, which is why it's not ranked higher, but it was genuinely trying to do something interesting and unique. For example, I think this book has about 3-4 lines of dialogue in it. Now, I've seen Brandon Sanderson talk about dialogue in books, and he tends to recommend about a third of the book should be dialogue. So, 3 lines in a 300-page book is not anywhere near what you would normally expect from a book. But it's written in a really weird and interesting way in order to avoid using dialogue that I think makes it quite a unique read, if a little tricky. Generally speaking, dialogue is much easier to read than non-dialogue prose. So not including any dialogue in a book is a very, very brave narrative choice, and one that makes this book, as I've said, tricky to read, but I think worth checking out potentially. There were also some weird narrative choices and pacing issues in this book. It's kind of split into 3 parts, and the middle part doesn't really have anything going for it. There were also some strange narrative choices within this book. It's kind of split into 3 chunks, I would say, narratively. The first is an introduction to our sniffing man and him growing up. The second is pretty meaningless, quite frankly. And then there's a third section when he is moved to a new city, and I thought that the third was by far the strongest of the 3, and quite frankly, if it had been cut down to a novella with just this third and a little bit of the introductory, I think it would have been a much, much stronger and tighter book. As it was, it somehow managed to meander in 300 pages, which I didn't know was possible. Not a tremendous amount happened, and the ending was both odd and fairly predictable. At number 9, we have Wolfworm by T. Kingfisher. Now, this is an arc I got. It's coming out in March, and I gave this a 3.25 out of 5. Now, a little bit of background about me and my experiences with Kingfisher. So, Kingfisher is basically 2 authors in one. The first is a cozy fantasy author. She tells fairy tales. Sometimes they have slightly darker elements to them. And this is what I've read the bulk of. In fact, this is solely what I've read from Kingfisher. And she has quite a lot of books out within this area. I think I've read probably around 5 or 6 by now, and I really, really love them. I think she's a really fantastic author. And simultaneously, in the last few months, I've been trying to dip my toe into horror a little bit more. I've read a few Stephen King books, although less at the horror end, and also the reformatory. So I figured I'd take a deeper plunge into horror, and what I've realised is that I should be paddling quickly for the surface because I don't think it's really a genre for me. This really creeped me out, and I didn't enjoy being creeped out by this. It follows a woman who goes to a secluded house run by a scientist who is an entomologist, I think. He likes bugs a lot, and she sketches bugs for him. And then it gets dark and twisted and messed up. And my face reading this book was like... And I didn't like having a face that looked like very much, but I did also really appreciate the first half of the book before it got old. So this got a good score for that, and also because from an objective standpoint, I think this was a really good book. But I've realised that horror isn't really a genre that I think I want to read too much more in. This was gross. A little break for snacks, perhaps? And that's ASMR. At number 8, we have Ghostwater. This is the 5th book in the Cradle series. Now, because this is kind of further into a series, it's a little bit tricky to discuss my thoughts about it in too much detail. Suffice to say, this is actually, I think, the lowest rating I've given to a Cradle book so far. I just feel as though Will White has lost the plot a little bit. We're getting a little bit repetitive. I'm not getting the originality I saw from the earlier books. This isn't to say I didn't really enjoy this book and haven't really enjoyed all the entries so far, but I think I might take a short break from this series before hopping back into it, because it just feels as though we're reading the same book over and over a bit. At number 7, we have Battlegrounds from Jim Butcher. This is one of the lower ranked Dresden books for me, which is honestly quite surprising because it's quite a climactic book. So I think a lot of people will probably rate this a lot higher than I will. It is actually basically the second half of book 16, but they were split up because they were quite long. And it didn't really work for me as a book. It was all crazy chaos and one big battle. I don't think that's a spoiler given that it's called Battleground. The book is one big battle, and I'm not a huge fan of that. This is basically why I DNF'd the Sun Eater series, because it was just long ass battle scenes for hundreds of pages, and I don't find them that interesting. I think that it's really hard to provide a cohesive narrative and good character development in that kind of situation. Yeah, this was quite a weak Dresden entry, in my opinion. I'll probably get crucified, but thankfully no one's watching, so I probably won't. At number 6, we have the next entry into the Dresden Files, 12 Months. Again, this was a weaker Dresden entry for me. This is essentially the falling action following the previous book, and there's not a tremendous amount of action going on. We're basically watching Harry Dresden recover from the events of the previous book. They were that crazy that Jim Butcher decided to write an extra book just to cover the events of that chaos and how Harry Dresden has reacted and the fallout from that. I didn't feel as though this needed to be an entire book. I think a really good novella could have come out of this, but it was kind of dragging and missing that Dresden spark for me. I'm hoping that in book 19, Jim Butcher is back on the horse and giddy-upping back into fantastic Dresden books, but these last two entries for me have been a little weak. At number 5, we have Jurassic Park. This is a staple of the sci-fi genre, and I have seen the movie, so I knew what it was about, which is not something I tend to do. I tend to read the book first and then watch the movie, but I think I watched the movie as a child who probably didn't even know that Jurassic Park was a book. But I really enjoyed reading this. I think it's quite different from the movie. I don't really remember the movie that well, so it didn't really ruin my experience of reading the book, but I think this is well worth a read. Genuinely, even if you've seen the movie and not read the book yet, I would check it out because I enjoyed it. It's quite scientific, which I like from my sci-fi every now and again, and cool. I wish I had some real good thoughts for you, but because I've waited until almost the end of January to film this book, I can't really remember any of these books that well, so I'm kind of grasping at straws, but hopefully we've got some kind of cohesive thought somewhere. This is good. That's my cohesive thought for this one. At number 3, we have Cleopatra. This one's coming out in February. I read a lot of ARCs, guys, not to flex or anything, but kind of a flex. This I loved in the first half. I got about halfway through and then recommended this to so many people and said, go read this, it's amazing. Or go read this when it comes out, plebs. It's amazing. And then I got to the second half. Ooh, didn't love the second half. So in the first half, I thought this was going to be a character study of Cleopatra, and I was loving it. It had political intrigue, it had depth, we had a really fascinating cast of characters, and then it slowly lost this plot thread and turned into more of a romance plot thread that really wasn't of interest to me at all. If I was a massive fan of romantasy, I would probably enjoy this, although I might find the first half dull. So I think writing this book in two halves, which is what it felt like to me, it was written. Having these two halves of the book with the political intrigue in the first half and the romance in the second half, you're going to struggle to find a readership who loves both of those things. So I think this book may struggle to find its place, and I was really frustrated because I genuinely thought this was soaring for 4.75, 5 stars, and then the romance in the second half, I have nothing against romantasy. In fact, there are some romantasy books that I really enjoy, but this just wasn't one of them, especially because it took a bit of a U-turn, and when I was expecting it to go one way, I expected it to zig and it zagged. So this was heading for a 4.5, a 4.75, something like that, and then just plummeted as the book continued on for me. So yeah, really disappointing, but still a fantastically written book. The Gate of the Feral Gods is at number 2. I've just refilmed all of my numbering because I said originally this was at number 4 and then thought, no, that's not right. A Dungeon Crawler Carl book wouldn't be that low. And it turns out that everything was wrong and this came second. This, again, there seems to be a theme of me just not liking later books in the series in December for some reason, is a weaker entry into Dungeon Crawler Carl. Now, it's still the second best book in December, which I think goes to show the strength of the series. But one of the things I noticed with Cradle and with this is that the feeling is that they're getting a tad repetitive. I've read the 5th Dungeon Crawler comic since then, and it actually took it up a notch for me, and I think we may have got out of that funk. But every floor at this stage started to feel like a different version of the previous floor. Obviously, we have a different setting. We have the same characters, that's inevitable, but the plot felt a little bit repetitive. That repetitiveness is why it's knocked down just a little bit from 4.5 and 4.75, which is where the earlier entries in the series ranked for me. I still adore this series, I adore these characters, I adore this setting, and I find myself grinning whenever I'm reading a Dungeon Crawler comic book, and it's not really that often that I just find myself grinning from ear to ear at a book. So there's something really unique and something so fun about this series. It's just really enjoyable to read, and it makes me so happy to read it. I'm slightly ashamed by my top read of this month, but it was The Phoenix Keeper by S.A. McLean. This is about a magical zoo, which I am still mad about because I actually wrote in my notes app Magical Zoo. This is my notes for writing. Things I want to write about at some point in the future, but probably never will. I wrote Magical Zoo. About a month later, I find out that this book is coming out. I was fuming, I'll tell you that much, because that was my idea, and it's been stolen. But it's done so well. It's now gone from the notes app having read this because I realised I can't better this book. It's so cozy, so heartwarming. I liked the romance. It was a little predictable, but I really liked it. This just made my heart warm and cozy and happy. The setting was magical. The characters were really relatable. It was a lovely book. People on Goodreads hate it, because I went onto Goodreads thinking, this will be rated highly. No. I seem to have such unpopular opinions recently, and I don't know what's going on, but I thought this was a cozy, fun read. Is it the most deep? No, but it's nice. If you're looking for something nice and cozy, and it's like a hot chocolate book. It's like hot chocolate. If you're looking for a hot chocolate in book form, I'd recommend this. And it's a fantasy zoo, which is just cool. Although stolen from me. Okay, I've forgotten to outro my last couple of videos. Still no idea how to do an outro. Like and subscribe. 3, 6, 5, go. 3, 6, 5, go. 3, 6, 5, go.